Kiev in 1031 was the size of a dream. A boy from the Norwegian fjords, from a world of wooden longhouses and coastal settlements where the largest building was the Jarl's Hall and the largest city was a market town of a few thousand people, arrived at the gates of a city of 50,000 people with cathedral domes that caught the light like Byzantine gold and walls that made the Norwegian concept of a fortification look like a fence. Harald was 16 years old. He had walked, and ridden, and sailed the rivers, from Norway through Sweden and across the Baltic and down the river systems of the Kievan Rus for the better part of a year. He had traveled with the remnants of his half-brother's army, the veterans of Stiklestad who had chosen exile over submission to the Danish-backed regime that now controlled Norway. He was the youngest of them and technically the most important, the half-brother of the dead king, the man whose blood claim to the Norwegian throne was real even if his current capacity to act on it was zero. He arrived at Kiev with a sword he had tied to his hand at 15 and a reputation that had already, in the specific way that Norse reputations traveled, preceded him. Yaroslav the Wise received him. What happened in the next 3 years, in the court of one of the most sophisticated rulers in Europe, in the military service of a state that sat at the crossroads of the Norse world and the Byzantine world and the steppe world of the Eurasian East, would shape everything Harald became afterward. He came to Kiev as a refugee. He left for Byzantium as something else entirely. At 16 he arrived at one of the most sophisticated courts in Europe with nothing but a sword and a dead king's blood. At 19 he left for Constantinople, the greatest city in the world, as a commander of 500 warriors. What he found there was beyond anything the Norse sagas had prepared him for. Subscribe, like the video, and let's follow the Eastern Road. To understand what Kiev gave Harald, you have to understand who Yaroslav was. Yaroslav Vladimirovich, Yaroslav the Wise, Grand Prince of Kiev from 1019 to 1054, was the most powerful ruler in northern Europe in the first half of the 11th century. His state, the Kievan Rus, stretched from the Baltic coast in the north to the Black Sea steppe in the south, from the Polish border in the west to the Volga River in the east. It controlled the river trade routes that connected Scandinavia to Byzantium, the routes that the Norse had been exploiting for 2 centuries, carrying furs and slaves and amber south and returning with Byzantine silver and silk and wine. He was also, by the standards of his time and place, genuinely educated. He had built the St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, modeled directly on the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, decorated with Byzantine mosaics by craftsmen brought from the empire, a statement in stone and gold that the Kievan Rus was a civilization capable of producing things of permanent beauty. He had assembled a library. He had codified the laws of his state in the first written legal code of the Eastern Slavic world, the Ruskaya Pravda, the Russian truth. He had also built his political position through a network of dynastic marriages that connected his family to every major royal house in Europe. His daughters married the kings of France, Hungary, and Norway. His sons married into the Polish, Byzantine, and German royal families. He understood, with the clarity of a man who had survived the brutal succession politics of the Kievan Rus, that marriages were more durable alliances than treaties. He had several unmarried daughters when Harald arrived. This detail will matter. Harald's 3 years in Kiev were not years of court life and philosophical study. He fought. Yaroslav had military problems. The Kievan Rus always had military problems, caught between the steppe nomads of the east and south, the Polish kingdom to the west, the various Scandinavian political complications to the north. He used Norse warriors extensively, as his father Vladimir had before him. The arrangement was straightforward. Norse warriors provided military service, Yaroslav provided food, shelter, silver, and the experience of fighting in organized military operations under competent command. Harald provided 500 warriors, the veterans of Stiklestad who had followed him into exile. This was a significant force, not a token contribution. He was not arriving as a supplicant with a personal guard. He was arriving as a military commander with an army, which gave him a standing in Yaroslav's court that pure blood claim would not have produced. He fought the Poles in 1031, a campaign in which Yaroslav recaptured territories in the Chervan cities region that had been lost during the succession struggles after his father Vladimir's death. The details of Harald's specific role in this campaign are not preserved, but the fact of his participation is recorded, and the campaign itself was successful. Yaroslav recovered the territories and brought back a substantial number of Polish prisoners. He fought the steppe nomads, probably Pecheneg, the Turkic tribal confederation that had been raiding Kievan Rus territory from the southern steppe for generations. These were a different kind of warfare from the shield wall battles of Scandinavia, fast cavalry raids, ambushes, pursuit across open steppe terrain. Harald was learning military forms that had no equivalent in his Norse background. He was learning, systematically and through direct experience, how to fight in every environment the medieval world offered. Jaroslav had a daughter named Elisaveta. The sources are frustratingly brief about her as a person. She appears in the Norse sagas primarily as the object of Harald's ambition and eventually as his wife, which tells you more about how the sagas treated women than about who she actually was. What can be reconstructed is this. She was educated in the Byzantine-influenced court culture that her father had built. She was approximately Harald's age and she was, by any political assessment, far above his current station. Harald noticed her immediately. He was 16 years old, a refugee king's half-brother with no throne and no prospects beyond his sword and his reputation. She was the daughter of the most powerful ruler in Northern Europe, a princess whose hand was a diplomatic asset that her father would deploy in the service of a marriage alliance worth considerably more than a landless Norse exile could offer. He could not propose. He could compose poetry. The Norse skaldic tradition produced one of the most remarkable documents in medieval literature from this situation, a poem cycle known as the Gamanvisor, the Joyful Verses, which Harald allegedly composed during his time in Kiev and Byzantium. The verses describe his military achievements in the third person, each stanza ending with a refrain that translates roughly as, "Yet the golden-haired girl of Gardariki will not have me." Gardariki was the Norse name for the Kievan Rus. The golden-haired girl was Elisaveta. He wrote 16 verses about his adventures and achievements, the battles, the campaigns, the gold accumulated, and ended each one by returning to the girl who wouldn't look at him. It is the most human document Harald left behind. By 1034, Harald had been in Kiev for 3 years. He had fought for Jaroslav. He had learned. He had accumulated silver and reputation and the specific military experience of a commander who had led men in multiple environments against multiple types of enemy. He was 19 years old and he was ready for something larger. The something larger was Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire in the 1030s was still the most sophisticated political and military entity in the known world. Its capital was a city of 500,000 people, 10 times the size of Kiev, 100 times the size of anything in Scandinavia. Its army was the most professional military force in Europe. Its treasury was stocked with centuries of accumulated imperial wealth. Its bureaucracy administered a state that stretched from the Danube to the Euphrates. And it employed Norse warriors. The Varangian Guard, the imperial bodyguard unit composed of Norse and later Anglo-Saxon warriors, had been established by Yaroslav's father Vladimir in 988, when he provided 6,000 warriors to the Byzantine Emperor Basil II in exchange for a dynastic marriage. The arrangement had continued and institutionalized. Norse warriors traveled to Constantinople, served in the guard for years or decades, accumulated Byzantine gold and Byzantine military experience, and eventually returned north, some of them wealthy enough to buy political power, all of them transformed by what they had seen. Harald had been hearing about the Varangian Guard since childhood. Every Norse warrior of his generation knew the stories, the gold, the campaigns in the east and south, the specific glamour of serving in the most powerful military force in the world. The Guard was the destination that ambitious young Norse warriors aimed for the way that later generations aimed for universities or stock markets. He told Jaroslav he was going. Jaroslav gave him his blessing, his recommendations, and, the sources imply rather than state, some indication that the question of Elisaveta was not permanently closed, that a Harald who returned from Byzantium with sufficient wealth and reputation might find a different answer than the one his current situation produced. Harald left for Constantinople in 1034 with approximately 500 warriors. He was 19 years old. He would not return to Scandinavia for 11 years. The route from Kiev to Constantinople followed the Dnieper River south to the Black Sea and then west along the coast to the Bosphorus. It was not a simple journey. The Dnieper had 7 major rapids between Kiev and the sea, stretches of river where the water dropped over rock formations that made navigation impossible and portaging necessary. The Norse had been doing this for 2 centuries and had names for each rapid in both Norse and Slavic. The sagas preserve both sets of names, a detail that speaks to how well-traveled the route was and how precisely its dangers were catalogued. The rapids were also where the steppe nomads ambushed travelers. The Pecheneg, the same nomadic confederation that had been raiding Kievan Rus territory for generations, knew that the portage points forced travelers onto land with their boats and goods, creating a vulnerability that a fast cavalry force could exploit decisively. Every group that traveled the Dnieper route traveled armed and alert, and the larger groups traveled more safely than the smaller ones. Harald's 500 warriors were a large group. They made it through the rapids. They reached the Black Sea in late summer or early autumn of 1034. The timing matters because the Black Sea crossing to Constantinople was easier in summer than in the storms of autumn and winter. They crossed. They arrived at the Bosphorus. They passed through the Golden Horn into the harbor of Constantinople. And then, the sources don't record this, but it is the most human detail imaginable. Harald Sigurdsson, 19 years old, from a country of fjords and wooden longhouses and 3,000 kilometers of coastline, looked at Constantinople for the first time. There are no words in the Norse vocabulary for what he saw. He had to learn Byzantine Greek to describe it. The Varangian guard accepted him. The process was not automatic. The guard had standards, examined the warriors who presented themselves, assessed their capability and their reliability. Harald's 500 men were experienced fighters, veterans of Stiklestad and the Polish campaign and the steppe warfare of the Kievan Rus. They passed. Harald entered the service of the Byzantine Empire in 1034 under the Emperor Michael IV. He was a rank-and-file guardsman. He had been a commander of 500 men. He had fought under a king. He had the blood of the Norwegian royal house in his veins. None of that mattered in the guard. The guard had its own hierarchy, its own advancement system, its own way of assessing who was worth promoting and who was not. Harald started at the bottom and worked up. He worked up fast. What he did in the next 7 years, in Anatolia, in Sicily, in Bulgaria, in the Holy Land, in the streets of Constantinople itself, built the reputation that the Norse sagas would spend 2 centuries elaborating. He accumulated gold in quantities that the Norse world had never seen a single man bring home. He became, in the specific Byzantine military system that was the most sophisticated in the world, one of the most effective commanders of his generation. And every verse of the poem's cycle about the golden-haired girl of Gardariki added another stanza. He was still thinking about Elizaveta. He was going to earn her.